time for insect friend of the day. Or I'm not sure we can call this one a friend or an enemy. Perhaps this is insect neighbour. This plant is a mullein, and this is the caterpillar of the mullein moth. And as you can see, they're really doing some damage to this plant. They're all up here, completely shredded these leaves, and they're all over it. Now, what should I do about this? Let's just stop and admire this butterfly here. I don't know what that is, meadow brown or something maybe. Anyway, right. The caterpillars of the mullein moth. Now, what should I do about these? Well, they've wrecked this plant, but it is their food plant. And I think what we're going to do is just leave them be. This is a plant we put here on purpose, and they have kind of wrecked it, but it'll either recover or it won't. I'm not going to try to control these, because we'll just find that if we spray to destroy them, we'll collaterally destroy lots of other things as well. So we're going to leave them be. These are caterpillars. They will pupate and turn into mullein moth, which is a brownish, fairly nondescript looking moth. I'll get you a good close-up of these caterpillars because they really are quite striking in their colour and pattern. But, you know, they got a place here. And those adult moths will lay more eggs on more mullein plants and probably destroy those too. But the moths themselves will be food for bats and birds, and the moths will provide pollination services for plants. So it's all a bigger picture thing. We were away for just 3 days in Cornwall and the garden's gone crazy. The tomatoes are now just racing towards the roof of the greenhouse, which is good. They seem to make a really slow start. I'm still waiting for the aubergines to do something, but they look like they're about to take off. The lettuce is now enormous. The French beans are flowering, dwarf French beans. The runner beans are flowering, and they reach the top of the canes here, so I've had to extend this framework here a little bit, give them some more stuff to climb on. But got loads and loads of runner bean flowers, that's good. The broad beans have got beans on them. It won't be long before we start picking these. These are being a little bit troubled by black fly, and I think I might just get the hose up here and just wash them off. That will just give the plants a little bit more of a chance to recover. Courgettes are in full swing. This one is variety called Something Gem, only producing male flowers at the moment. I've got a couple of courgettes here I've got to cut from this yellow one. I've got a different kind of yellow courgette here, a slightly paler yellow. That's producing now. My purple mange 2 peas. There's a crop to be picked on here already today. So I'm going to have to go over this and pick some of these pods today because they're ready to pick. The fennel we've already picked one of and used. But here's another one here, which I think is probably just about ready. Chard, not doing quite so well, but it's picking up. It's been a bit eaten. And that last pak choy there is obviously not going to get used now. That one's bolted, but we'll still pick some of those flowers off of there probably and use them in salads and garnish. Oh, and the potatoes. I need to get some more soil in those and lift the rims a little bit more, earth them up some more. The Tayberries that we planted year before last have just been fantastic. Look at this. Look at all this fruit. And they are just so delicious. We need to pick some of these, and I think we'll try and make something with them. And it might be a fruity Clafoutis, not like the elderflower one I made experimentally a few videos back. Anyway, let's pick some of these and see what we can make with them. So, would you look at that? That's a nice crop of Tayberries. not even a quarter of what's on the plant, and we haven't done anything to keep the birds off. We haven't netted it or anything like that. We're just kind of just allowing the birds to take what they want, and there's still plenty for us. Let's make something nice out of this. So like the elderflower thing, this is going to be based on Clafoutis, but it's going to be a variation. I suppose sometime I should probably make the real thing to an authentic recipe, but what we're doing today is just a bit more experimentation. So butter, I'm going to generously spread this flan dish. This is about 25cm flan dish with butter. I'm going to make sure that every part of it is liberally coated, especially the base. Now the reason I'm not melting the butter on there is I actually want this to be sticky. So I want this to coat the thing rather than just oil it. So there is the butter. We've gone quite hard on the butter there. The ground almond, I've got 75 grams of ground almond, and I'm just going to shake this all the way around the inside. I need a tray. I'll just do this over a tray because then I can be a little bit more, or a little bit less careful. And we can make sure we get the ground almonds right to the top of the pastry case. Well, right to the top of the flan dish. There is no pastry on this. It's just going to be a crust made from this ground almond. So that's now going to go in the fridge just to set that butter and that little bit of ground almond back in the dish. So whatever's left in there, it's probably about 50 grams. Now we're going to make the batter. So for this, I need 3 eggs. And I'm just going to beat those eggs together. I've got 100 grams of sugar. Last time I cut this down to 75, but I've got 100 this time because these berries are a little bit sour and baking them will accentuate that sourness, so it needs a bit of sugar to balance it. It's not the same as neutralising it. I'm going to have some almond essence because we're going to go for a kind of Bakewell tart vibe here. It's got ground almonds in it, so we might as well have a little bit of almond flavour. So that is just a little splash of almond essence, about half a teaspoonful. Double cream, 250 ml of double cream, about that much. And then into this we've got that ground almond, that's about 50 grams now, and 25 grams of plain flour. So we're really making a bit like a cake batter, but instead of butter, it's got the fat from the cream. And that's now just going to stand for a little while to hydrate the flour, and the batter will thicken a little bit while we just prepare other bits. So I've got about 50 grams of walnuts here, which were walnut halves, but I'm going to chop them quite small. Right, time to assemble. I think we're going to have the walnuts across the bottom, because if they're on the top, they'll burn. And then the berries, I know they're not true berries, the berries will hopefully then stop those walnuts from floating up too much. We'll have a nice generous layer of these Tayberries. Perhaps save a few for garnish, mainly because they won't fit any more than that. Okay, single layer of those across the bottom, like that. Pretty good. Oven is up to temperature. So the batter, I got a feeling there might be too much batter here because these berries take up a fair bit of volume. Let's see how far we get. I'm going to put this on a tray so it doesn't overflow. Right, I think that's probably as far as I dare fill it. That's going to go now in the oven at 180 degrees Celsius for probably 30 minutes, but it cooks from the outside inwards, so we'll just watch it, and once it's bubbled up and souffled in the middle and golden across the top, we know it's done. Right, that tray has been preheating. That can go back in there without too much kerfuffle. And that's dinner baking in the bottom as well. Okay, I believe that's done. It's still ever so slightly wobbly, but I think if we go any further we're going to burn it. So that's now going to sink like it always does, but it looks alright, doesn't it? I do like the way the fruit has arranged itself into almost into concentric circles. That was not intentional. Right, that needs to cool down now because this is best served apparently just kind of lukewarm. All right, let's see what this is like then. Well, nice and soft. 6 portions seems about right. Oh, look at that. So it's kind of cakey, pancakey, custard inside there. I think we'll just have that with a little splodge of Greek yogurt, a couple of the fresh berries, very ripe fresh berries. You might as well have all of those because there's no point saving them. There's more outside there. Okay. Right. Oh, and then just a little dusting of icing sugar. Well, what do we reckon? Let's give that a taste. It's halfway between a cake and custard. And yeah, the flavours. Cooking these Tayberries has really brought the aroma of the fruit out. Nuts work really well. Different, nice contrast of texture between the slightly crunchy walnuts and the gooey cake. And the tangy fruit with the almond and just the sweetness of everything here. That is a spot-on combination of flavours. Time for another little update on my calamansi plant, or calamondin orange. There was another little flush of flowers, and it looks like they got pollinated because we've got little developing fruits there. I'm watering and feeding this regularly. These have already started to get bigger, so I think these are developing fruits. It looks like we're going to have about probably half a dozen, maybe 8. So yeah, I'm going to keep on watering it. I use this teapot, which I bought in a charity shop, as a watering can. Not all is entirely well with my littlest watercress farm here. As you can see, the plants are just stunted. It's not really doing very well. Last year we had quite a lot of watercress off of this. This year it's just not done well at all. So I'm going to strip this out and completely redo it. First thing I need to do though is turn off the solar pump that's driving the water into the top of the cascade there. And that is as simple as invert the solar panel and the pump stops. So the main problem here is I think that I used a mixture of soil and gravel. So I made some landscape fabric bags that I put a gravelly soil mixture in, and then there was a channel down the side where I put just pure gravel. But I think that soil has probably just clogged up the whole flow, and we've got moss growing in there, so I've made a swamp rather than a riverbed here. Some of you did mention that in the comments and say don't do that. Unfortunately, the nature of comments on existing videos is it's too late. I already did. So anyway, this year we're going to try and put that right. All of that's going to come out. I'm going to sieve it into this bucket so we get to separate the soil and gravel. The gravel goes back in there, maybe with a bit more gravel, and then we'll replant some bits of watercress. This is also an opportunity to take that bucket out and give that a good scrub and maybe run some clean water through the pump. So I don't suppose it's completely clogged up underneath there, because when I tip this up, water does flow out of that lower nozzle. So there is water flowing inside this channel, not especially rapidly, but there is water flowing underneath that mat of vegetation there. Oh look, a ladybird. Let's get that ladybird out of there. A 7-spot ladybird. fly away home. Anyway, on with the show. These are seed pods here, and so these, there you go, that is watercress seeds there. I could save those and start again from seed, but cuttings are much easier. So here we go. So the plan is the sieve goes in there, and then the soil and or gravel will go in there, and then we'll walk that through, try and separate the gravel from the soil, and then the clean gravel I'll put into a bucket for reuse. That landscape fabric is going to go in the bin. Right, that's probably enough soil in there now for sieving. Might as well wash that. In fact, I think I might get the hose. But yeah, the notion is we sieve out the soil, leaving the gravel. So there we go, a bucket of mostly clean gravel, a pile of gubbins that most of it will go in the compost heap. I just take the landscape fabric out of that, and several buckets of muddy water which will get tipped on the vegetable patch and just become part of the soil. I will need to just give these a thorough wash out. And when I say thorough, I don't mean clean enough to eat off of, just get the remaining sediment out of them. And then tackle the bucket underneath there. So this is the bucket, and yeah, as you can see, there is a fair bit of organic residue in the bottom there. So that's going to get a clean out. Right, so a bucket of relatively clean water. You can see the pump is running there because I've turned the solar panel back round. So I've given the pump inlet a flush with the hose, but as you can see, this pipe and probably the inner workings of the pump are pretty well grimed with bacterial films. Very interesting colours actually, sort of, I think we're looking at blue-green algae there. Anyway, I'm going to sterilise this with some Milton. This is generally used for sterilising babies' bottles and feeding equipment, but it is just hypochlorite bleach, so I'll put a glug of that in there. There's no need to be particularly precise, and we're going to let that run around and through a few times, and we should actually see that this biofilm here fades and disappears. And then I'll tip this water down a sanitary drain, and then we'll flush it and purge it several times with clear water. The good thing with hypochlorite bleach is that when it reacts with stuff, it just basically, the waste product is salt. It does release chlorine ions, and the chlorine ions are what do the sterilising, but in its reactions with biological materials and just stuff that's in the environment, the waste results of the reactions are salt water. So while that's running its sterilising cycle, I'll get the gravel back in these containers. It's probably going to need a bit more because there's no soil going in there now, so I might need to top it up with something. So clean container on top. All right, all refilled, and now I'm going to give it another wash to fill it up with water and actually just test the level of the thing. So there we go. When that's full of water, it'll run like that. And then when this bottom trough fills up, it'll run over, and I'll just catch that in the bucket for the moment. So the purpose here again is just to give that gravel another wash, make sure we've got no sediments that are going to clog up the pump. Also just to charge it and to test the flow, and then that water that comes out I'll put on the garden. So yeah, there's quite a bit of sediment coming out of there, so we'll purge that first or else we'll just end up with that in the bottom of the reservoir bucket. We have also got these pieces of natural chalk, and watercress likes an alkaline soil, so we'll put a few pieces in here. So I'll put that there to stop any bits of gravel washing down the pipe, but water can still get down there. And then these bits of chalk here, I'll put them underneath where the water runs, so as it flows out of here it will dissolve some of this chalk gradually, and that will keep the water in the trough a little bit alkaline, which is what watercress likes. It likes chalk streams. And then I will just rescue a few little sprigs of watercress. There's a bit, it's got some roots on it. We shouldn't find we need to do anything more than that, and that should just grow now. So I'll put a few little sprigs in here, and then we'll put everything back together. The pump has been running that bleach mixture for about 20 minutes now, and it has actually got rid of most of that greenish scum on the inside of the pipe. Not all of it, but some of it anyway. So now I'm going to turn that off, rinse out the bucket, run the pump several times with clear water just to really completely purge it, and then put it back in place. Right, so everything back in place. Pump is now going back into the water, and then this pipe I will clip up to here somehow or other. I've got a clip for it somewhere. Okay, and we should now find, when I turn the solar panel back over, that water begins to flow. And there it is. Water's flowing in the top there, runs down this fake little meander out of here over the chalk into the second trough, back down into the reservoir. Now, why have a reservoir underneath here, you may be asking? Why not just pump the water straight from the bottom of the trough to the top trough? That would be more straightforward. A couple of reasons. One, additional water here makes it less likely that the system will dry out catastrophically. If we get evaporation from here, which we do obviously, that bucket has to dry all the way down before the pump will stop working. So it's a backup for that. It's a buffer for evaporation. It's also a buffer for things like feeding. I will have to feed this with plant food, and it's a lot easier to dilute plant food and get it slightly wrong in a non-critical way on a bigger volume than it is on a smaller volume. So yeah, I will have to feed this with some all-purpose liquid plant food. I probably won't use my bin juice stuff because that's got a lot of phosphates and potassium in it, and that tends to induce flowering. So I will probably just use a high nitrogen fertilizer for this, because it's the leafy growth we really want. I meant to say actually the greater volume of water also provides a buffer against overheating, so this will tend to warm up during the day. Watercress doesn't actually really like the warm water, it would prefer it cold. So the extra volume of that bucket helps to buffer against that as well. It's just a larger volume of water, takes longer to heat up, so stays cooler by the end of the day. So this Tayberry bush we've got here, by the way, Tayberries are a raspberry blackberry hybrid, I believe, a bit like a loganberry, but a different cross. Tayberries, different cross, very vigorous, very heavy fruiting, and the fruit has very small seeds, so they don't get stuck in your teeth. And did I mention they are delicious? They are like a slightly sour raspberry, but without those woody seeds that you get in a raspberry. So really good. And we must have picked more than 2 kilos, probably 3 kilos of fruit off of this bush this year. These are all the places where you can see there was just tons and tons of fruit on here. So it's been really productive. We will need to prune it, and this particular plant fruits on the 2nd year wood. So what that means is that first year you get these long runners. So this long spiky runner here has grown this year, so it puts out this long vegetative growth, There'll be no flowers on this year, no fruits. Next year, this runner will fruit. And then after that, it will just be woody and unproductive. So what we actually need to do now is take note of where all these fresh this year's runners are. Cut out all of the fruited wood. Well, we'll wait until we've finished picking the berries. When we finish picking the berries, we'll cut out all of the wood that's fruited this year, and then we'll tie in those runners onto the fence so that they fruit next year. Here in the woods, the raspberries that we planted here last year, or was it the year before? I think it might have been the spring of last year. These are fruiting now. We haven't managed to get any ripe fruits off of this. In fact, I think the birds are getting them before we do. There's one that has ripened and gone. There are some that are ripening. Here's some more which haven't ripened yet. The birds are getting these before we get them, and I don't care. I planted them here really as an attempt to get raspberries, which are a native wild species, established in this bit of woodland. I will allow these to spread and colonize this woodland because they belong here. Okay, well, this is kind of annoying. Insect friend of the day is a thrip. This is also known as a thunderfly. Why is that annoying? Well, watch what happens when I try to brush this off the screen. It's not on the surface of the screen, it's behind the glass. It's in between the screen and the front glass. It's not, it's not an animation that's playing on this, in this window. That is an insect that's found its way in through one of the air vents, presumably, in this monitor, and is now in between the glass and the screen. Hopefully it will find its way out before it just dies and becomes an annoyance similar to a dead pixel. So a couple of little follow-ups. The mullein plant is now in full flower, and actually all of that caterpillar damage didn't really do it any lasting harm. It's produced some brand new leaves here. I don't know where the caterpillars have gone. I suppose it's a combination of between some of them being eaten by birds and perhaps some of them survived to pupate, and so presumably those pupae are hiding away somewhere underneath the plant. And the watercress, well, you can see how much progress that has made since I planted it in there when we cleared all of this out, and that appears to be doing quite well. Lots of fresh leafy growth on there, no sign of it trying to flower. And that's what we want, because we want the leaves. Meanwhile, the poppies that I have allowed to grow here have now all flowered and produced seeds. An interesting double one there, look at that. Must have been slightly damaged, and it's produced 2 seed heads on 1 stalk. So I will leave these pods to ripen, and then we'll shake the seeds out of them, and maybe I'll make some bread and we'll have that on top of a nice loaf of bread. The other ones I planted, the other ones that I moved, have been somewhat swamped by the courgette plants, but most of them have made it. Another one down there. This one's now flowering. And then we did have some more over here. So we've got some here that have also flowered. And yeah, I'll let those seed pods ripen and let the seeds develop, and then we'll harvest the seeds and make some seeded poppy seed bread or something. Last night I glanced in through the greenhouse door and I see we've got our first ripe tomatoes here. This is a variety called Coralic. And there we go, first ripe tomato from this greenhouse, at least the first one I've seen. Got to confess I haven't been in here as much as I would do normally. Automatic watering systems would tend to let me off the hook, really. Anyway, tradition demands, I think, that I taste this tomato on camera. It's a very good tomato. Sorry, I did a kind of Lord of the Rings thing there. Very good tomato, nice acidity, nice rich tomato flavour. Looking forward to a few more of those. I've got another one of that variety somewhere here, I think. That one in the middle, I think. Lots of tomatoes to come. tomatoes also, the plants have now made it over the top of this bar that I suspended up here, and they're now starting to drape down the front, which is when they'll be most productive, I think. Once the branches pull down and start sagging, that's when the plants produce the most fruit. I was walking up the path yesterday and I noticed several things. One is my wild strawberries still fruiting. It's a shame that one's not quite ripe. I'm not going to pick that yet. Then a bit further up, gooseberries. The gooseberries are definitely ripening now. In fact, they are very ripe. These need picking. So when gooseberries ripen, well, a lot of varieties of gooseberries turn red, like this one has. It's also softened a little bit. I'm going to taste this now. So I've just pinched off the stalk and the little persistent calyx. Let us give it a taste. Good. Like a sweet grape. And I also noticed we have got raspberries. Look at that. That one's been a little bit molested by bird poops. That one's not ripe yet. That one isn't ripe yet, but here we are. There is a ripe raspberry. Let's give that one a taste. Very good. I do think straight off the plant is the best way to enjoy raspberries. So no refrigeration, no making them soggy by dousing them in water and whatnot, just straight off the plant as nature intended. There is a bit of a problem with bird poo over this side, so if we pick any from that side, I may have no choice but to wash them. But I mean, the birds are going to get most of these, and that was always our intention. But I think I will just have one more. Very good. And I'll take a couple down for Jenny. But yeah, I mean, I think the rest of them will probably just let the birds have them. They are, you can see there's a branch arcing out here. There are runners going off over there. I'm going to let these plants invade the woodland because they belong here. Also, my pineapple guava, or feijoa, is flowering. Not particularly well, but it has had a few flowers there. The whole plant's not looking tremendously happy. I think it was a little bit overwhelmed by this fuchsia next to it, but it's not dead yet. So I've just been out collecting some seeds. It's seed time for red campion. Red campion's one of our most striking hedgerow wildflowers, and in spring the plant is absolutely covered with pretty pink flowers. Everything from sort of pale marshmallow pink to so shocking pink that you can hardly look at it. The flowers are divided by plant into male and female, so you get male plants and female plants. And at this time of year, which is the start of July, the female plants have got these little seed pods on them, which look like little flasks with an open top. Well, the top opens up, I think, when the seeds are ripe. And so I've just been out and collected a few of them and shaken them into this little bag. I've got in the habit of carrying these little bags in my wallet. When you buy a bit of consumer electronics, you often get a little bag like this with some screws in it, or some rubber feet or something for a piece of networking equipment or something like that. I just keep a couple of these in my wallet now, exactly for this purpose, for collecting seeds. We've got a bit of kind of waste ground around the back of our house that's not very easy to mow the grass there, and I think I'm going to try to encourage these plants to grow there. Now, if I wanted to be very, very sure these were going to grow there, I would plant these in pots, raise them as seedlings, plant them out, nurture them, and so on. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go and scatter these seeds on that area and let nature have a chance. There must be 300 seeds here, so hopefully a few of them will grow. Maybe some of them will stay dormant in the soil for decades and will grow after we've moved on. So I've got them in this bit of paper. So just, yeah, there we go. So there's more seeds coming out of this thing. I'm not going to break all of these open. I'll probably just leave some of them as they are and let nature do its thing. But yeah, when they're ripe, the plant grows up to about 1 metre tall, sometimes a bit taller. So the plant sways in the wind and these seeds naturally get shaken out of these little flask-like seed pods. So if you want to collect seeds for red campion, you have to be there at the right moment in time, or else all you find is empty pods. Anyway, that's enough wittering. Let's get on the garden and get these planted. So this is the place around the back of the house here. So it's just this kind of not very useful bit of grassy bank that is difficult to manage, but it'll be perfect for these sorts of wildflowers. So I'm going to scatter these seeds onto here, and I'm not going to try and dig them in or anything like that, just spread them around. I know what this plant looks like as a seedling, so I will be on the lookout next spring for the seedlings and make sure we don't chop them off or lose them. But yeah, those seeds will now work their way down to get contact with the soil, and at the appropriate moment they may or may not germinate and grow into red campion plants here in Atomic Shrimp Garden. Time for the comment positivity section, where we're just going to look at some interesting or curious or uplifting comments. Comment on the Smuggler's Walk video. It's beautiful there. Can't they make those old pillboxes into small bungalows visitors can rent for a nice quiet holiday? So this is about the little pillboxes that are dotted all along our coastline, the former defensive structures from World War II. It is an interesting idea that they could be converted maybe into holiday lets. They are very tiny and often damp and pretty derelict, but they're also significantly off-grid, so I'm not sure. They were just little concrete boxes to keep people relatively safe in that defensive position and somewhat sheltered from the elements. But yeah, I think some of them are not even really quite big enough to actually get like a full-size bed in there. But but one of the structures I walked past on that walk, what looked like an underground house, is actually a converted emergency generator bunker from World War II. So there was an emergency electricity generator that was in a concrete building that's been buried over with a mound of soil. And you can rent that as a holiday let. And I thought, wow, that'd be quite interesting to stay there for 1 or 2 nights, even though it's not very far away. Relatively speaking, it's still here in Dorset. So it's a bit weird, the idea of going on a holiday let somewhere relatively close to home. However, I looked at it and it's £1,000 a night, so you know, looks a great deal of fun as a place to stay, but £1,000 a night is slightly out of my budget. But yeah, I think those structures that probably could be converted probably have been. On the Sticky Willy Coffee video, such an impressively long list of common names. Moreover, there's a lot of variety in them as well, apart from sticky being in about half of them. It really makes me wonder which plant has the greatest number of different common names. Interesting one, this one actually. So Sticky Willy, cleavers, goosegrass, robin run the hedge, sticky weed, catchweed, whippy sticks. I think, I can't prove, I think most of those common names are probably coined by children, because Sticky Willy is a plant that I think nearly every school child that's had access to that has pulled a piece and stuck it on somebody else's jersey. That's one of the kind of mildest pranks you can really pull on another person. But yeah, and I think that aspect of the plant being a bit of a prank and a plaything for children has probably been the reason why it's got so many common names. But it is an interesting question. If you know of a plant that's got an abundance of common names, do let me know in the comments, and perhaps we'll have a bit of a contest in the comments to see who can come up with the plant that has the greatest number of recognised common names. Interesting to explore that, I think. Question about when I'm in Spain, do I use a walking app to find new walking routes? I use an app called Footpath, which is on Android. I think there might be a version for it on iOS as well. It's just a very, very good footpath finding app. And I've never been to a place where it couldn't find me footpaths. I think it's got footpath maps for all different countries in it. And yeah, it has never steered me wrong in terms of saying there was a footpath when there wasn't. And yeah, I find that incredibly useful. It will find footpaths that aren't necessarily marked with footpath signs as well. Next, on the last random stuff video that had the Chesil Beach walk in it, somebody said, I would suggest rather than transferring Babington's leek to your garden, that you harvest them from the beach. They seem to grow in great abundance there. In this way you avoid the previous problem you had with three-cornered leek taking over. So as you may know, at our previous house in Hampshire, the garden was overrun with three-cornered leek that was accidentally introduced at some point. I think it came in as an unwanted guest in a potted plant we bought or were given, and it just took the whole garden over. The only problem with trying to harvest Babington's leek from the wild is I wouldn't be allowed to dig it up, because it is illegal to dig up that plant from the wild or from land that where you don't have the landowner's permission. So I would only be able to harvest the above ground parts of the plant. That might be okay though. Related question. Somebody said, may I have your opinion please? I have an old-fashioned metal wash tub and I was wondering if I could grow three-cornered leek in it so as to contain the thug whilst remembering to remove and eat the flowering stems. There are a few plants where I live and the ground is being cleared and fenced in. I really don't want to take them off my menu as I so enjoy them. So, is it safe? Is it safe to introduce three-cornered leek to your garden? Can you keep it under control? Is the question. What about if I put it in a container? What about if I put it in a tub? This is a question a lot of people have asked. And so the only recommendation I can make here is don't do it. The plant will escape confinement. In theory, it seems like it ought to be possible to confine it to a container like that and then diligently remove flowers so that no seeds are formed. But in practice, this plant will outwit you at some point and you'll find it growing outside of its container, because three-cornered leek, as well as reproducing by seed, it produces many little offset bulbils off the bottom of the bulb, and so these are tiny little bulbs that just grow on the side of the bulb underground. And so even if you think you're digging it out, for example, if you have had three-cornered leek in your garden and you try and dig it out, you're invariably going to miss some of these tiny little offset bulbs. They are smaller than a grain of rice and they can still be viable. So if you put it in a container, at some point it will outgrow that container and you'll need to repot it, or you'll dig some out so that you can eat the bulbs, or a squirrel or a bird will go and dig in the container, and some of those tiny offset bulbils will find their way into your garden soil and then it will just run rampant. And so I said, sorry, having dealt with a garden full of the stuff, it's just not worth the risk. But then that made me think, actually, I should take my own advice here and not introduce Babington's leek to my garden. Even though I think Babington's leek is probably a much better behaved allium than three-cornered leek, it undoubtedly is. It's a bigger thing anyway. I think it would be easier to eradicate if it got out of control. But I think I've got to take my own advice here and say, no, don't introduce a plant that might reproduce wildly to your garden. And alliums are a group of plants that do have a reputation for doing that. And certainly with Babington's leek, it had that seed head that was full of a cluster of tiny bulbils. So each one of those is capable of growing into an independent plant. So three-cornered leek, for obvious reasons, because I already know it's bad, don't introduce it to your garden, even in a container. You can't keep it under control. You will lose that battle. And once it gets established in the garden, it's impossible to get rid of. So I'm going to take my own advice here, and Babington's leek is not going to be invited to my garden. I will just go and harvest it from where it's growing abundantly in the wild. Interesting question. I must have mentioned in some video that I was thinking about going and living on an island. Now, at some point we were talking about moving to the Isle of Wight. Another point we were talking about moving to the Isle of Portland. and I talked about living on an island. And this one comes up quite a lot, actually. If you're from the UK, don't you already live on an island? And of course, technically, yes, we do. We live on an island. The mainland of Great Britain is an island. But I think this is especially if you live by the coast and you're aware of an island off the UK mainland, you tend to think of that as the island and this as the mainland. If somebody said, would you like to live on an island? I tend to think of that as a very small island, like the Channel Islands, the Scilly Isles, the Isle of Wight, the Isle of Portland, Sark, Brownsea Island, the small islands off the UK mainland. I suppose really everybody lives on a landmass that is surrounded in every direction by water if you're prepared to go far enough. All of the continental landmasses do ultimately have a border that is sea at some point. So yeah, we all live on an island, I suppose. Geographers will probably disagree because island has a definition, but if we were to think of islands as just a piece of land with water around it, we all live on islands. Even if you live on a continent that's joined to another continent, ultimately if you go far enough there's water surrounding all of that. On the self-organising custard pie, it makes me think of a quiche. I reckon it would be lovely savoury. And could it be modified into a savoury variant? I am actually already working on that because I agree. I think the idea of a quiche that you just throw things together and bake sounds really fine to me. I've often thought actually that savoury quiches, the pastry on them is not completely necessary. The crust on a quiche is not necessarily the best bit of a quiche. So I think maybe the self-organising style of, impossible pie quiche might be quite nice because the pastry is minimal, and also if you assemble it all together and it organises itself, then it doesn't need blind baking and all of that nonsense. So I will have a go at that, and there might be a video coming soon about that. I suspect, I'm sure people have already done that because it's such an obvious and good idea. There must be recipes already out there for that, but I'm just going to not search for those, and I'm going to see if I can just invent one myself. I'll probably end up inventing something that somebody's already done. On the Cornish pasty video, 2 questions actually from the same person. I wonder if anyone ever baked just pastry in the shape of a pasty during lean times, days leading up to payday, that kind of thing, so as not to appear poor or in need. That's a really interesting one actually, because that made me think about it, about how a Cornish pasty might be one of those things that's a bit of a leveller if people are in times of hardship and they can't afford meat, for example. I'm not sure about making it so it's just pastry, but maybe that did happen. But if you think about it, where all of the filling is enclosed, there is a sense in which a pasty could be a bit of a leveller for people with humble income eating the pasty, people with even lower income eating perhaps the pasty that only contains potatoes. There is a term tidiogi, I think, which is potato pasty, or a pasty with a higher proportion of potatoes. I think it's called a tidiogi. Tiddy being the West Country name for potatoes. So yeah, I think there's a sense in which, in the same way that school uniforms are argued to be a leveller for different levels of income, if all of the kids have to wear the same school uniform, you can't differentiate between people who have more income or less, a way of reducing bickering and bullying that can happen at school. I don't know whether that actually achieves success in doing that, but that's one of the theories of school uniforms. And perhaps that's true also of Cornish pasties, that if it's all enclosed in pastry, that's not only convenient and wholesome and filling and so on, but it's also a way of making it a little bit easier to avoid feeling shame if you don't have the money to put expensive things in the pasty. Perhaps. Interesting thoughts. And the same person asked a different question. Could you not just call it a Cornish style pasty? I'm pretty sure you can. So the Cornish pasty definition that we looked into in depth does only restrict commercial sale of something called a Cornish pasty or a traditional Cornish pasty. So yeah, you could call it a Cornish style pasty and probably get away with it. I happened to travel to Crookherne in Somerset the other day, and there was a little butcher shop selling Cornish pasties, which in a way sounds more Cornish than Cornish. That's just a way of escaping the legalities of that framework. And it is interesting that that PGI definition, it really does only protect one very specific thing, which some people thought that was good, some people thought that was not so good. So there was lots and lots of discussion and healthy discussion about all of that. But yeah, you could probably find some semantic dodge calling it a West Country pasty, for example, and the PGI just won't apply to that. So you could then put whatever you like in it, and it doesn't have to be made in a specific place. I think if you call it a West Country pasty, it doesn't even have to be made in a West Country, because there is no PGI for that specific description. On the cooking challenges, which I haven't done for a while, but there will be some more coming soon, would be interested for you to try this in food shops that aren't big supermarkets. Don't know if it's an option where you live, but Asian and European grocery shops in cities are often much cheaper and definitely would give you more flavour and variety. And I would love to actually do a cooking challenge based on, for example, a Polish shop or an Asian or world foods shop or one of those sorts of things. The reason I don't, or the reason I haven't so far, is my shopping behaviour. So when I do the budget challenge things, I have to walk back and forth in the supermarket and often end up spending quite a lot of time looking at things. Certainly when it was a price limited thing, I had to make sure that I could get those things and fit them into the price budget. And that entailed a lot of picking up things, putting them back again, comparing prices, making notes in a notepad on my phone, all of those sorts of things. There is a sense in which that behaviour can look a bit furtive. Spending 45 minutes in a shop to come out with 8 items could look a bit dodgy. In a big supermarket, nobody's ever challenged me about it. And if anybody did find it weird or suspicious, they were polite enough not to stop me and talk about it. But I think in some of the smaller shops, like the little Polish shops, I think if I was to go in there and spend 45 minutes messing around, comparing prices, looking for the cheapest things, studying everything, I just think it would appear more suspicious in that context. I think it would be a bit unfair on the shopkeepers to make them feel suspicious of me in that way. I suppose I could go and ask permission and explain myself in advance. I fear that might have its own problems as well, because it's not always easy to explain what my objectives are in a clear and concise way. So I just haven't done that, and that's the reason really. It's not that I don't want to explore those things. In fact, I do shop in those sorts of shops whenever I get the opportunity really, because the variety is just very stimulating, I find. But doing a budget challenge in those shops, I just can't think of a way of doing it that avoids the appearance of furtive behaviour that I just don't really want to do in that context, and don't really want to subject those independent shopkeepers to that kind of weirdness. If I can think of a way, then maybe I'll do one. Back on the Cornish pasties, was there any food safety concern about the cooked beef in room temperature over time? Good question. So when you make a Cornish pasty, you're putting raw beef and vegetables inside a pastry case, baking it for 45 minutes to an hour. Everything inside the pasty cooks and becomes fully cooked, and then very commonly the pasty is then allowed to cool. It's not chilled, it's just carried off, and it gradually comes down to room temperature over the course of hours perhaps before it's eaten, perhaps at lunchtime. So it might be cooked early in the morning, mine were, and then eaten at lunchtime. Is that a food safety concern? I think in some context it would be. But with a Cornish pasty, there is a factor that makes it a little bit safer to do that, and that's the fact that it's all sealed inside this pastry. So you put all the ingredients in the pastry, it's baked at a high temperature, and it's steam cooked inside the pastry. That is essentially sterilising the inside of the pasty. So it's killing off any bacteria that are in there. There are possibly some bacteria that will survive that process or go into spore and survive that process. But by and large, inside the pasty, the temperature is being maintained at above 100 degrees Celsius for maybe 40 minutes or something like that. So everything inside the pasty is kind of sterilised. There are steam vents, and it's not a perfect seal, so it's not like canning, but it is a bit like canning. So as that then cools, unless fresh bacteria can get inside the pasty easily and start working on the contents, which of course they would do if you left it for days, but unless that can happen, it won't start to spoil and become unsafe. And so sealing inside a pastry case like that does buy you a bit more time. Now, in terms of formal food hygiene, you're probably meant to still maintain that at a temperature above the danger zone for a maximum of 90 minutes or whatever the time period is in formal food hygiene regulation. But in terms of home cooking, where those regulations are optional, cooking a pasty and keeping it intact and whole and allowing it to cool down to room temperature does in practice buy you a bit more time before the contents of that pasty will become spoiled by foodborne pathogens. So it's not perfect, but it probably does de-risk it a bit in practice. So a comment on the Cornish pasty video, but about the beach walk bit. So this is me saying, there we go, woof at it, and then Eva woofed at the rock, exactly on cue. Eva, as cute as ever. I love her little barks. Sounds kind of like someone imitating a dog. It's funny actually, I didn't get it on camera, but when we were walking along that beach, Eva was quite excited and making her high-pitched woofs. And there were some kids further along the beach who heard Eva barking and they started mocking her. And these kids were going, roo, 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 and mocking poor Eva. She doesn't know, obviously. But yeah, she does get that kind of attention sometimes. On the blue sunflower reveal, that's quite an old video now. I really like the lengths you went to show that the flowers are not blue. I think pretty much everyone was immediately convinced when you said these blue sunflowers are not real for the first time. You'd be surprised, this is the internet after all. The whole blue flowers thing is a really interesting rabbit hole that I might go all the way down at one point, at some point, and make a video on blue flowers. Because you would think that a simple statement about there being no blue sunflowers would be uncontroversial. But this being the internet, people had to react. There were people telling me, of course there are blue sunflowers, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. My uncle had a blue sunflower, so you're wrong. And then there are people saying, well, we could have blue sunflowers actually, so technically you're wrong, because we could have blue sunflowers. All we'd need to do is genetically engineer them. Yeah, sure, that's like genetically engineering sunflowers to be blue is a sentence that deserves the prefix, all we need to do. It's very, very easy to say, oh, why don't you just, when somebody else has to do the work. And then there was the whole discussion about genetically engineered blue roses. So actually there is a blue rose, but when you look at the blue roses, they're not blue, they're kind of weird greyish purple. Because, and I don't want to steal too much thunder from the video about blue flowers, for flowers to be blue, the plant has to do more than just produce a pigment. It has to do some really interesting biochemical stuff. That's why I think the video might be interesting. So if you want me to make a video on blue flowers, do let me know in the comments. It's probably going to be a me talking to the camera type of video like this, because most of what I've got to say will take far too much effort to illustrate or diagram or anything like that. So it would be a video with me just talking vlog style to the camera like this, with maybe a few little diagrams and stuff off to the side. But if you're interested in me talking for 45 minutes to an hour on blue flowers, what do we even mean by the colour blue? How do we see colours? What are colours? Do colours exist? Do let me know in the comments, because that's a thing I might do. So the other extreme that people went to on the blue sunflowers thing was to say, well, of course there aren't blue sunflowers because there are no blue flowers. Blue doesn't exist in nature, which is just, again, a nuance failure, because blue isn't a very common colour for flowers, but it does exist. And here's a picture of some delphiniums I took at a garden centre the other day. This photo is not doctored. That's what those flowers look like in reality. And when you show things like that, you get this thing where people say, oh, well, actually, it's not blue. That just looks blue. And again, that's why I think perhaps this video could be interesting, because what does it even mean to say it's not blue, it just looks blue? Is there a difference? Structural colour, chemical colour. Where does colour come from? What causes the phenomenon of colour? Not just in our perception, but what actually causes light to be different is an interesting question. The answer is, for things that are different colours, not the same in every instance. So yeah, like I say, if you want me to do the blue flowers video, do let me know in the comments. If you really don't want me to do the blue flowers video, then yeah, let me know about that too. Anyway, just to finish us off then, is the portrait on Manuel's account, that's this picture, that of a notable individual, or indeed anyone in particular? And the answer is, that's me. That was me in Victorian fancy dress preparing for a party many years ago. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.